While the Pokemon world is inhabited by a vast amount of characters ranging from gym leaders, to rivals, to champions, to members of evil organizations, there is perhaps no more famous group of trainers than the playable characters within each region. Although these main characters are left blank and devoid of any personality within the game so that you, the player, can identify with them and put yourself in place of them while you adventure through a region, in the grand scheme of Pokemon's lore, all of these trainers are actually legitimate characters that have names, personality, official Pokemon they use, and influence the events of the greater canon within the Pokemon universe. Hilda and Hilbert successfully defeated Team Plasma and Getsis in Pokemon Black and White. In Gen 4, we have Dawn and Lucas who stop Cyrus's plans and confront Giratina. There's Caleb and Serena who travel the Kalos region with a group of friends and uncover a sinister scheme by Lysander, and so on. Now, the reason I bring up all of these playable characters is because none of them, aside from Red, have reappeared as NPCs or non-playable characters in Pokemon games after their initial debut. This means that we've never gotten to truly interact with any of the main characters and see what they're canonically like, and debatably more important than that, we've never gotten to see what Pokemon they would use on their official canon teams. I'm sure you guys know where I'm going with this, but for today's video, I thought I would kick off a small video series where I actually speculate and theorize on what some of the main characters' canon Pokemon teams could be like. From Gold and Kris all the way to Ray and Ailey, in this video series I'll be going through and sharing what Pokemon I think the main characters in each region would use on their quote-unquote official canon teams. Now, before we get started, I should mention that this video is entirely speculation, and until we actually get these main characters reintroduced in the games as NPCs with official Pokemon teams, all I can do is share my own speculation on this topic. This video is really just my own ideas and speculation, and I'm not trying to say that any of my ideas are what these characters' official teams would truly be. Alright, let's jump into this topic fully now, and for today's video we'll be taking a look at Gold and Kris, the protagonists of Generation 2, and what their potential Pokemon team could be. So to determine what Pokemon they could have on their canon team, I looked at two qualifiers. What Pokemon are given to them throughout the main story of Pokemon Crystal, which is the game they both appear in, and what Pokemon they're forced to encounter on their journey throughout Johto. It might seem like these are two very random and arbitrary criteria for what their canon teams would be, but if we look at Red, who is the only playable character to be turned into an NPC and given an official team, and we look at what Pokemon he uses, we can see that they all fit into these criteria. Red's Pikachu was given to him as a starter in Pokemon Yellow, his Snorlax was a Pokemon he was forced to encounter on his journey through Kanto, and then the rest of his Pokemon were all given to him by various people on his adventure. Analyzing Red's team is how I came up with the criteria for what other playable characters' canon teams could be like. I know this might be kind of a stretch, but Red is, at least for right now, the only playable character to transition into being an NPC you can battle. And I think the two qualifiers for his Pokemon team can be applied to the other game protagonists to find out what their teams could possibly be. Okay, so getting back to the topic at hand, if we go by the criteria that a Pokemon was either given to Gold and Kris, or they were forced to encounter it on their journey with the option to capture it, here's what I came up with for their canon team. Their first Pokemon would be the final form of one of the Generation 2 starters, being Typhlosion, Feraligatr, or Meganium, which are given to them at the start of the game by Professor Elm. Their next Pokemon would be a Togetic, which they would have received as a Togepi egg during the early stages of their journey. After this, they would have an Umbreon, which would have been given to them as an Eevee from Bill and Goldenrod. Pokemon number 4 would be a Sudowoodo, which would be the one that's blocking their path and they're forced to encounter on Route 36. After this, they would have the Red Gyarados, found at the Lake of Rage that they must encounter, and their final Pokemon could be a Dragonite, which they receive as a Dratini from the Elder at the Dragon's Den in Blackthorn City. Now, these 6 Pokemon are what I think the canon team for Gold and Kris could be, but I can already hear your comments about why did I include blank but not blank, so I wanted to briefly address a couple things about this team. The first thing I should address is that I'm sure a lot of people are wondering where the Shuckle you're given in the game is at, and it's worth noting that the Shuckle you receive in Cianwood City isn't technically Gold and Kris's to keep. The dude only gives it to them for safekeeping because your rival in the game stole his other Pokemon, and it's implied that eventually Gold and Kris would give it back to him, thus making it not a viable option for their team. Regarding the Umbreon they have, I think Gold and Kris would have one to counter the Espeon Red has in the original Generation 2 games. I don't think they would have one of the original 3 evolutions because evolution stones are somewhat rare in Johto, and I don't think they would have an Espeon because that's what Red has on his team in Gen 2, so I think Umbreon is the logical evolution they would end up with. Alright, so this team is what I think Gold and Kris would canonically use within the Pokemon world. But I did make an alternate team for them where they would have all 3 of the Johto starters. Technically, there would be no way of Gold or Kris getting all 3 starters canonically, unless we count trading and breeding, which goes outside of the 2 criteria I established up front. But I figured that because Red is kind of the representation of Gen 1 and has all the Kanto starters, then Gold and Kris could be viewed as the representation of Gen 2 and have all the Johto starters. So this B team for them would consist of the 3 Johto starters, final forms, an Umbreon, which we talked about before and would be given to them as an Eevee from Bill, the Sudowoodo they were forced to encounter, and a Dragonite who was given to them as a Dratini by the Dragon Den's Elder. Now for their B team, I had a little more room to play around with what Pokemon they would have aside from the starters. I tried to have this team represent a diverse array of types, and getting more specific, I think that Umbreon would be a total lock, if only to once again counter Red's Espeon. Sudowoodo they're forced to encounter, and I think Gold and Kris wouldn't pass up the opportunity to capture something so rare, and Dragonite is a free dragon type being offered to them, which I think they would totally use. Anyways, what do you guys think? Given the criteria I laid down, do you think these teams are close to what the Generation 2 protagonists would canonically have? Maybe you think they would have an Electrode from the Mahogany Town Rocket Base, which is another Pokemon they would be forced to encounter. Let me know what you guys think of these teams, and if you think they would have something different, please feel free to share your own thoughts and ideas below. This is a series I hope to continue on and do for every group of protagonists, and maybe, if we draw enough attention to the main characters in Pokemon, we might actually see one of them show up in a future game. Well, probably not, but I'm never gonna stop trying. Anyways, thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you later.